We're 79.
Goodness,
Yeah.
78, 79?
That's the kind of house I
But we
grew
have
up in, yeah.
neighbors.
Well, yeah, well, my
65 degrees.
In the Keys, if you set it below like 74, like, that did not happen. Everyone would be in like sweatpants.
No
I know.
way.
Yeah, but I
We
put
do
that
too.
additional
Yeah, I've had the windows
insulation
open
in
all
my
day.
attic.
Oh, we need to replace our back windows. Those are the only ones that are screen windows, and you just feel the heat.
You like it cold at night, huh?
But I couldn't believe how much the insulation makes such a big difference in the utility.
I don't know how you could
I
do
bet
it.
it did.
It went down $30.
So, it's pretty good payback.
That's good.
Okay. are we
Okay,
ready?
it's 5:30 on Thursday, February 15th, 2024. It's time to call the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Board for the Village of DeQuesta to order. Lance, can you do roll call, please?
Leslie Dasher,
Here?
Teresa Maggio,
Here.
Elizabeth Shower,
Here.
Sherry Ambrose,
Here.
Jean Magadoni,
Here.
Marisha Piri, Marco Valdez,
Here.
and Jared Gaylord.
Okay, and
We're all looking at, okay.
and we'll call,
The mystery man.
oh, yes.
Let the mystery
And we'll call, we will ask for the approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Agenda is approved. And approval of the previous meeting minutes from November 16th, 2023.
I'll make a motion to approve the previous meeting minutes from November of 2023.
Second.
Why are, never mind. Why aren't we approving December?
Did we have a December meeting?
No, we didn't.
No,
November.
it's
No,
we didn't have
November
January.
16th.
I thought we didn't have January.
There was no December
Plan.
PZB.
Oh, my apologies,
Yep,
yes,
yep.
okay.
Yes.
So
Thank you.
2 meetings.
Yep, so the December LPA will come
Thank you.
to the next one.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Good question. You scared me for a second, though.
Scared me too.
That's right, it's February already. January's one we didn't have. I get you.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Approved, sorry, yay.
It's planning and zoning, not LPA.
Did I have a second on?
Yeah.
Yes.
Second, yes.
Okay, and all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Minutes are approved. Okay, we'll move on to our agenda item. Our only agenda item is SPM 1-24. And now, do I read this, Dylan?
You can go ahead and read it.
Okay,
Yeah.
application from 236 US Highway One LLC for a minor site plan modification for new paint colors on an existing 3,544 square foot building in the C2 zoning district. And Jay, are you?
Mr. Chair, if I may take over,
yes.
SPM 124, this is an application quasi-judicial in nature. If anyone's present this evening and plans to give any testimony regarding this application, I need to swear you in at this time. If you could please stand, raise your right hand, repeat after me. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? Very good. You may be seated. At this point, I would ask the members of the board to provide any ex parte communication they may have had regarding this application, including disclose that, as well as any site visits, anything of that nature. Now is the time to disclose.
I drove by.
Thank you.
Drove by.
I drive by it all of the time, but
Yeah,
you
all
know,
day.
I didn't really look at it, but.
Okay, thank you very much. We can proceed with the application.
Okay, if you'd like to go to the podium and give us your name and address for the record, please.
Jonathan Modica, 112 Intercoastal Circle, Tequesta, Florida, 33469. So, we moved into the building very recently, just opened last week. Really excited to have a store in my hometown. Been living here, I guess it's been 36 years now. I moved here when I was just 1 in the local town. We moved around, obviously, in that time. Really excited about the spot. I think the colors are less than appealing and a little inconsistent with the general feel of the town, with all the improvements that have been done on US 1 for the over 30 years that I've been here. And, it went from a pretty standard looking strip mall to a beautiful area. And I think a more Key West flair colors that we're proposing are going to be a better fit for the town and more visually appealing. And really, that's it.
Okay. And now I noticed that it's 2 businesses.
Yes, it's a joint business. So we have my business, Adventure Sports. So it's a water sports business, particularly wind sports. and Bunkhouse Cafe, which is really a plant-based kitchen. They do serve some other things like coffee and things, but it's a plant-based menu.
Okay, I was just curious. It's not on the agenda, but I was just curious
Yeah, no,
about it. So.
it's actually quite good. I've never been a plant-based. The irony that it used to be, as you all probably remember, Park Avenue Barbecue back in the day, and I do miss the barbecue, but
I do too.
but the plant-based is pretty good
Kind of different.
and different. Yeah.
I have a quick question.
And if I can I'll just jump in real quick too. So I just have a real quick presentation. So this requires a minor site plan approval. So this, you guys will be approving it or denying it tonight. It does not go to council because it's a minor site plan amendment. This is the existing site. You guys are all familiar with it. I think we could probably all agree the colors could use an upgrade. So this is what they're proposing right here, kind of a three-toned color scheme. We have some code sections here. They were in the staff report, but it's kind of the criteria for review when you're looking at these things. So you want to make sure it's harmonious with other buildings, harmonious with the surroundings, the facades are appropriate, various things in the code here. So that's all I've got.
Okay, we can open the floor to public comment. Marie, if you'll come to the podium and give us your name and address, please, for the record.
Marie Sapiri, I live in the country club. I would recommend approving the paint colors, but I would suggest that we add a condition of approval that the fake grass in front is removed. The code did not allow fake grass on commercial properties previously, and it requires a special exception today. Also, I understand that this business prioritizes being a good steward of the natural environment, which is excellent and consistent with the village's objectives. However, fake grass is not. It's not good for the environment, and it's not Florida-friendly per the University of Florida. And our code prioritizes Florida-friendly landscaping. In addition, if we not requiring the removal of the fake grass means that we have a pretty bad example for the community. And that's how fake grass ends up spreading. People see it, and without thinking about the ramifications of it, the whole life cycle of producing the plastic to the landfill eventually, is how, without thinking about it, people put it in their spaces too. But there is always a better alternative, and I feel confident that this business would find that. So accordingly, I think we should have a condition to remove the fake grass, if that's possible. And on the paint color, I definitely would not deny this application for the paint colors that the applicant has suggested or selected. But since we're in a forum with the purpose of aesthetics to try to make the village more beautiful, I think it's worth thinking about what colors work and what don't. Driving around the village, and US 1 in particular, you can see that paint color selection is clearly challenging. And we are not, I don't think, achieving beautiful colors that are cohesive with each other and the natural environment in Tequesta. So I think we should try to develop an understanding of what works. Natural colors make sense as a good starting point. And this project, I think, has those in its coastal color scheme. But one point that may be a problem for this project is using different shades of the same green, or seafoam green. One of the reasons tone-on-tone color schemes often do not seem to work well might have to do with the masses of color that are too much when they're all together. I think we've avoided that in this particular one. So again, I'm not proposing that we deny. But I think we should start to articulate some principles for everyone to think about, especially as we look forward, so that we can provide good guidance to property owners in selecting colors. Because the examples we have in the village and nearby are generally not great. The vast majority of colors do not work. And I think we can do better in finding a framework for selecting colors. To that end, one principle should involve harmonization of colors, which we have in our code. It looks like one of the colors here is from the Williamsburg collection, and Williamsburg is beautiful. But the other colors in this scheme I don't believe are. And I think we should consider that if paint developers put their palettes together so that they harmonize, it might be a good idea to stick to those palettes, although paint makers' opinions obviously are not the final decision, or not decisive here. But it is something to think about, because presumably the paint makers are attempting to have cohesiveness in their individual collections. And another principle is that it's notoriously difficult to get a good sense of the final result in real life from photographs. As a result, I think we want to err on the side of caution in the selection, and it would be great if we had larger paint examples in the future too. The chances are the experience we have of buildings around us is that risk-taking, especially in paint color, is unlikely to work. Green in particular seems to be an extremely difficult color to pull off well on buildings, and I think the problem is that green paint shades tend to clash with the natural plants that are around them. So one of our guiding principles should definitely be visual cohesion, and to that end, I highly recommend requiring that the fake grass be removed.
Thank you, Marie. Any other public comments? Okay, the floor is closed. Oh, please.
Is it okay if I?
Yes, please do. Does he have to repeat his name or anything? Okay.
Yeah, firstly, I think I mostly agree with all those comments. One of the suggestions I was thinking before I came here, I've been living recently, in the process of finalizing a move from Key West Village down the street, still in Tequesta. But in our community, we have a list of colors that are sort of pre-approved. And I actually am enjoying the process of coming here and meeting all of you. But clearly, if somebody had a building that was looking for a minor color and there was a pre-approved list, maybe that would be worth considering. Obviously, you folks know a lot better than I do, and that was just a thought the other day. But I certainly agree. I think these colors are more cohesive with the town. I think the greens and stuff that we have there right now don't really work very well. They are clashy with the plants. Unfortunately, the turf was there when I got into the property. I'd certainly be open to doing something else with it in the future. I can't afford to do that today. Wouldn't be willing to put the money down for that, but certainly in the future, it's definitely open for anything like that. And I agree that it's not an ideal thing for the environment. So no other comments there.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no other public comments, we'll close the floor to public comments and open the floor to board comments. Teresa? Liz?
Well, I like your colors, I like the palette. I mean, it's a nice combination. And the reason why you have artificial turf is that we approved that years ago when it was supposed to be a restaurant during the pandemic, and they were going to have outdoor seating out there, and that was good for the children to play and things like that. So that's why your artificial turf is there, and we approved that years ago. Thank you.
And Sherry?
No comment.
Yeah, I really like the color. I have a question. Is this exactly the same palette as Lenora's?
I'm not too sure. I doubt it.
It looks exactly the same, so I wondered.
My sister was an artist, so she's an art therapist. I can't, colors of me are
Okay.
I'm more of a math person, but she selected those based on, we originally had, I believe the colors were, one was called Key Largo something,
Right.
or whatever, and from her experience doing other buildings that they never look exactly like that, she thought these colors would look what we were trying to get towards. So she was pretty convinced that when you actually see the colors on the building, they'll look a little bit less bright.
I can't see.
I think that's why I asked if they are. It looks the same. I went back and forth a couple of times today, and it looks like the same exact palette, but I don't know that for sure. But it's really pretty, and I love the coastal. I also had a question about the turf, and I know that's not up for discussion really
No, it's
tonight.
not. Right,
I just
right.
remembered we just said no turf, didn't we, a couple of meetings ago? Or
Yes.
just,
Well, but it's
just,
there. It's been
just
approved.
putting
Yeah.
green turf.
But it's
And
been
it-
approved,
But
so.
In the way that they adopted, I'm sorry to interrupt, they did create a caveat that commercial properties can come back to council and to planning PZB for a special exception to have turf. So there is a path where people can request it, but they have to go through the special exception process to do it.
But if it's still there, it's left. Is that how we look
Yeah.
at that?
Grandfathered in.
Grandfathered in, and this one I think was a part of the previous site
It
plan
was-
approval,
it was the-
so,
Yes,
so we're kind of,
it's the previous
Stuck with
site
it,
plan
in other
Stuck with it.
approval.
words.
Yeah.
Stuck with it, okay. Very nice, thank you.
And my only comment is I don't want to see a homogeneous color scheme throughout the town. I think that would not be good, but, so I enjoy seeing people's choices
Yes.
for colors, and we did, Liz would be, I can't remember if you were here or not, there was one business that did try to change the color scheme, and it was denied.
Oh,
Because-
yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah, there was one, it was horrible.
Yeah.
It was
Yes.
denied.
I remember
so-
that one.
yeah.
So we do deny things that are really just, yeah, don't fit, but I kind of like to see different,
I kind of like, well, I
I
agree
like a
with you.
variety.
What I like about it is when I first moved here, everything was that clay color, right? The
I know,
clay
I know,
color. And
yeah.
it's like now
Well,
it's
that was the code then.
And the code,
That
I
was
know.
the whole
Well,
US
but it-
1
the-
Carter code.
Yes.
Popularity and everything.
But
and
it is changing, so.
And as things change, you're going to have some things that look kind of out of place, but then others start falling in, so I kind of,
But it's
like the
bringing
change.
the old town feeling, and it just makes it more harmonious, and it's, you know, and it's a nice color, and it'll stick out, and, you know, it might attract people to,
yeah, and there were a couple of the buildings on US 1 that were, some of the people opposed them because, oh, they're much too modern looking, and they're built now, and
and
they look fine. You know, so-
you're used to, I guess it's because we're used to seeing them.
Yeah, well, that's just it.
I know,
You
it
know,
grows
somebody
on
has to start out being a little bit more
Different.
progressive. Yeah,
I
exactly.
have a question. The sign colors, what will the colors for the sign be? Do you know?
The current sign?
Or I assume you're gonna have signage like that's not on the rendering? I haven't actually been by in the last,
Yeah, they do have a sign.
Yeah,
yeah, I haven't been back in the, I only was by like,
Yeah, I don't remember.
it's been a couple weeks.
Oh, okay.
Yes, we have a sign on the road. We don't have a sign currently on the front of the building.
Yeah.
We haven't made any decisions. We were thinking of actually not putting another sign on the building. We feel like there's,
No,
it'd be a bit redundant.
Okay.
We'd like to put something up there, maybe a surfboard or something like that. I don't
Okay.
know what we'd be allowed to do, what we'd have to get approved for, but that's the current line of thinking is something unique out there, not just another sign.
Oh, so you do have a sign. Now-
Another sign, so there's a sign on the road.
On the road.
Kind of a
Like a
random
monument
street.
sign kind of thing.
They replaced the existing
Yeah.
sign
Okay.
face, the
Well, see,
blue
that-
sign face
yeah,
with
Yeah,
their,
that goes to show you how much I pay attention.
Well,
I just assume something's going in the triangle eventually, right, so.
Right.
It's actually not uncommon for people to miss it. It's at a bit of an odd height, right behind a few trees, so it's.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But you do miss the sign, I will tell you
Yeah,
that.
Yeah, I did.
People, learning that there, I'm pretty sure, small.
Okay. Okay, are there any more board comments? Okay.
I would like to make a motion to approve SPM-1-24.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion passes.
Thank you. Good luck.
Well, look, we look forward to seeing you open and running and all that good stuff.
and I think you told me you're gonna have a grand opening March 1st tentatively?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
But you're opening now.
But we'll see the mayor there probably doing like one of the grand opening ribbon
Yeah,
cutting
we just
things.
saw the mayor.
All right, thank you.
Congrats.
Okay, are there any other comments before we? Do I have a motion to
Adjourn.
adjourn?
Nope.
Sorry.
No, we don't.
Not yet.
We got staff comments.
You don't want to miss out on my great legal presentation, do you?
I was kidding.
Oh, I thought it was a separate meeting.
Nope, this one.
Just this one here.
That's good.
Nice, nice try. Nice
I said I wanted
try.
to be home by 6.
Not getting out that easy.
I'm sorry, I was thinking of a separate meeting, but you're right, okay,
Okay, Dylan.
sorry.
I'll call my own item. Item number 3 on our agenda this evening is a yearly overview of ethics and procedures from your legal counsel, Dylan Brandenburg. This is my one chance to rant at all of you for however long as I like. So you should all be nice to me. I provided each of you with a memorandum regarding an overview of your responsibilities as the P&Z and LPA board. I'm not going to go through all of this. I'll leave that to you. There will be a quiz on it at our next meeting, so I expect each of you to thoroughly prepare for it. What is the Planning and Zoning Board? You all are the the local planning agency for the village of Tequesta. So as you are aware, you are responsible for reviewing any changes to the land development code or the comprehensive plan. By statute, it's required to go through you first before it reaches the commission. You also review things like site plan modifications that came in front of you this evening. You are the final decision makers for site plan modifications for things that don't exceed $50,000, that do not modify footprint, lot coverage, density, height, number of stories, or things like aesthetic modifications like changes to exterior building color and finishes, like just came in front of you this evening. You also hear and decide appeals where it is alleged that there is an error in any order, requirement, decision, or determination by an administrative official in enforcement of the zoning code, or any ordinances adopted relating to single-family properties and structures in the R1 or R1A zoning district. You hear requests for variances from the code and things like special exceptions. So how do you all make your decisions? And again, this is review for a lot of you, but I think it's nice to do every year. Just remember that if you're going to discuss any business that may foreseeably come in front of the Planning and Zoning Board, it has to be at a public meeting that's been advertised. That doesn't mean you have to be paranoid. You don't have to shun each other and walk quicker when you see someone come down the road or anything. If you see someone at the grocery store, you can ask them about the Super Bowl and ask them how their day's going. You just can't talk about that property that you heard is coming in for a special exception from the board, and what does that other member think about that? That would be an inappropriate conversation to have. So it's just, most of this is just common sense. Sometimes we have quasi-judicial proceedings that come in front of us. These are kind of like miniature court hearings, right? This is when an applicant shows up and is requesting something from the village, whether it's an approval of a site plan or a variance from our code. It's important, it's important to take these seriously and understand what's going on, right? We're creating a record. So when an individual comes in front of the board, I swear them in, everything that they're saying is verbal testimony which goes into the record. The application that they fill out becomes a part of our record. The comments from the board become a part of our record. And if a decision of the board is ever challenged and is reviewed in a court of law, what that court is going to do is look at everything that was entered into the record and determine, based on what was submitted, did the board make a decision that was in line with our adopted code and procedures. So speaking of which, what is it that you are looking at when you're making your decisions? Our constitution for the Planning and Zoning Board is the village's comprehensive plan. Every decision that is made has to be in line with our comp plan. Any land development regulation that is adopted has to be in line with our comprehensive plan. It's a big document, but I would encourage each of you to regularly take a look through the comp plan, review it. And when you're making your decisions, I encourage you to base those in the comp plan and the land development regulations. The only time you're going to run into a problem as a board is if during an application hearing you start saying things like, I really just don't like the color purple, and I don't think that that's right for the village, and so I'm going to deny your application. That's not how your decision making should be based. Your decision making should be based on, the comprehensive plan says that harmony with other structures in the village is an important precept of the comprehensive plan, and I don't think that what's being presented here today meets that criteria, and that is what I'm basing my decision on. So I would just encourage you all to reflect and always remember that the comprehensive plan is guiding all of our decisions here at the board. And really the only time you're going to run into trouble is if you start making decisions or basing things off of criteria that is not in the comp plan or not in our land development regulations. Moving through this. General Rules of procedure during meetings. You all have been on the board for a while now, and you're familiar with the way things work. The chairperson is in charge of running the meeting. You have a level of authority over how to direct the meeting and guiding the conversation. People are expected to conform to our civility code, which is part of our code of ordinances. In that code, it outlines we don't allow things like personal attacks or people getting out of line, and it is incumbent upon the chairperson to enforce those rules, and you can do that. Generally, our board is open to public comment, and members of the public have the ability to come up and speak, and we have a 3-minute public comment period. And if it is incumbent upon the board to the chairperson to enforce that. If you are an alternate member of the board, and you would like to give public comment, you are giving it under that 3-minute time period. Unless you are seated on the dais, you are treated as a member of the public. Let's see what else. Florida's Public Record Act. Anything that you are creating with regard to your service on this board is a public record and is discoverable. This includes emails, text messages, social media posts. So I would encourage you to not to do those things. I would encourage you not to be sending text messages regarding your business on the Planning and Zoning Board. I would encourage you not to be making posts on social media in your official capacity as a board member. These are things that could lead us into trouble. Let's see what else we have here. Palm Beach County Code of Ethics. We're within the county. We conform to their ethics code. You can find that just by Googling Palm Beach County Code of Ethics. It's 13 pages long. It's not a particularly long document, and most of it is common sense. It too goes over things like gifts, right? Should not be accepting gifts from individuals. I don't know if anyone is really doing that, but any gift from a vendor or lobbyist that exceeds an aggregate value of $100 is prohibited under the Palm Beach County Code of Ethics. And if you receive anything like that, you need to report it to the state as well. This doesn't mean that you need to turn in all your relatives around Christmas time. This is limited to individuals who, we're talking lobbyists, vendors, people who might foreseeably come in front of your board. Another item, voting conflicts. Any item that comes before you in which a decision would result in a benefit to a member of your family, a spouse, a principal, or a business associate creates a conflict for you. Anytime something like that happens, you should abstain from voting on that subject matter. If you're not sure or have a question about it, give me a call before the meeting. We'll talk about it and we'll figure it out beforehand. And the way that you do state that on the record is simply, when it comes time to call for a vote, address the chairperson. Chair, I'm going to be abstaining from this item. I have, this is the relationship I have with this person, or, it doesn't have to be a voluminous disclosure, just, I have a conflict on this item for this reason. I'm going to abstain from voting on it today. As the staff, we are here for you as a resource to answer any questions or concerns that you have. So I encourage you to not hesitate. Each of you have my business card. Give me a ring anytime you have any concerns about anything. Remember that Jay and myself are, as much as I hate to admit it, we are human. If you do have a concern or about something that you think is coming up, or you want to ask a question, I encourage you to reach out to us in advance of the meeting, if possible. Just give us a heads up that you have a question or concern. That way it gives us a little bit of time to address that before we go straight up to a meeting. But I have really enjoyed my time here with all of you at the P&Z board. I think it's a great board, and I'm happy to be here. Again, I'm a resource, and I'll leave it at that. If you all have any questions anytime, please reach out.
And I know why yours is thicker. Hers was double-sided.
Is that right?
Yes. Hers was double-sided and yours is single.
Yeah, this is for you.
Just FYI.
Just an FYI.
Two.
And only Liz would notice
I
that.
can't get this one up because I wrote on
I
it.
know.
I saved them.
If you wanna just,
I refer to it.
Yeah, I have mine at home.
and we will email copies of these to the alternates, so Dylan didn't print enough copies.
I was one short for you.
Sorry.
I owe you one.
I'm pretty sure I still have mine at home also, so I'm happy to share it if you guys want to review since you're new.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Dylan. And we'll move on to item number 4, update on land development regulations recommended as part of the commercial corridor master plan. Is that Lance? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
That's probably out of order.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sure you know who I am, but I'll say it for the record. Lance Lilly, representing community development. You may have remembered this. We did this last year. This was based on Treasure Coast's commercial corridor plan that they adopted. I'm just going to go through it briefly if you're not aware. We also have been going through this through several workshops with the council, so some of these things are probably going to be a little bit unfamiliar. So just to start, in 2022, the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council conducted a 5-day charrette, which they received feedback from the residents as well as the business community. Through that process, they came up with that report on the left-hand side. In 2022 of November 2022, they adopted the master plan, they being council. And then we had follow-up meetings with Mr. Dana Little, village manager, Mr. Allen, and then we talked about the next steps. We also brought this before this board last year, March of 2023. And then at the bottom, as you see, we had several workshops with the council, which one was in May, July, December, and actually one last month as well. So what was discussed in this master plan, it was district centers, which are kind of like overlays, frontage standards, civic open space, the measuring of height, drive-through buildings, gas stations, location of parking, primary streets, dark sky night lights, and green design. So if you're familiar, this is what they actually put together before, which was like 3 circles with the different overlays. One of the circles was the Village Center North, which is that Publix area and like north of County Line Road, or north of US 1 when it gets to County Line Road. Then they had the southern portion, which is the town center, which is more like your Paradise Park area. And then you have this area, which would be the Village Center. So since then, we've been working along with Jay and the rest of the staff. We have changed it to 3 overlays, similar to what they had before, but we changed the name just to kind of fit the village a little bit better. Tequesta Drive overlay, which would be this area, all the way to the railroad tracks. Then you have US 1, which would be pretty much any parcel that fronts US 1 for the most part. And then you have the Village Center, which is similar to what they had before, but it goes up Old Dixie and goes to Village Boulevard and includes Bridge Road and some of those other areas. So this is the Village Tequesta Drive overlay. So the overlay would include C1, C2, and C3. And as I mentioned, it'd be this area as well as Seabrook Road, the Cypress Corridor, and also the it goes to the railroad tracks. So what would the intent of this be? The intent would be to preserve and protect the neighborhood character, aesthetics, use permitted within the corridor while providing opportunity for limited retail and services. So, and I'll go over some of these in a bit. The reason why we're actually doing this presentation is because at some point you may see an ordinance come before you, which will have more detail of this, but this is just to kind of give you a briefing of what's to come. So, formula restaurants will be prohibited, and I'll go over that shortly. Formula businesses would be permitted up to a square footage of 1,250 square feet. Again, that might change when you see the ordinance at some point. We're still working on different things based on council's feedback. Small scale character / charm, facades closer to the corridor, parking in the rear, and we'd have some type of civic open space, landscaping, and street canopies in the ordinance. So what's allowed currently? So within Tequesta Drive overlay, or that corridor, you see that it would be C1, which allows a front setback of 15 feet. C2 has a front setback of 25 feet, And then C3 has a front setback of 15 feet. With this overlay, we're proposing that it have a maximum rather than a minimum. So essentially, you can be closer to the road rather than you being required to be further from the road. And then these frontage standards were based off of what Treasure Coast put together. So essentially, depending on where you're located in the corridor, you're allowed to have different frontage standards. So for example, if you're on Tequesta Drive West, then you're allowed to have a porch. However, you can't have a bracketed balcony, for example. And same thing for the other streets that are mentioned. They also mentioned primary and secondary streets. So the primary streets in this overlay would be your main streets, such as Tequesta Drive, Seabrook, and Cypress. Everything else, such as like, your Willow Road and things like that, would be your secondary streets. Oh, there we go. So formula businesses. What are formula businesses? So essentially, in short, it's a commercial business that has like a trademark or a big name business. So like, for example, Staples or Home Depot or Trader Joe's. They're not your normal mom and pop businesses. So those would be more of a formula business. So those include like, you have employee uniforms, decor. It's pretty standard. They'd have a trademark and things like that. At the moment, a formula business would be allowed for up to 1,250 square feet. If they exceed that, then essentially it requires a special exception use, meaning that they would have to go to council for approval for the use itself. And then they'd come back to this board for site plan and everything else that you are used to or accustomed to. So what we actually did as well is for formula businesses, we kind of put another layer onto it. So if someone were to come in today, although the use would be permitted or special exception use, they would have to, one, abide by the special exception use criteria, which is the first bullet that's there. So they would have to abide by that special exception use criteria, which is aesthetics and that it's not a nuisance and things like that. But also the other bullets that are on here, which would be that it won't alter the identity of the village zoning district, contribute to diverse and appropriate blend of businesses. So something that's not out of place, essentially. Complement the existing businesses in the district, be compatible with the surrounding neighbors, and everything else just kind of reflects with aesthetics for the most part. So frontage standards, as mentioned. So we essentially are trying to encourage buildings to be closer to the road. There's a lot of benefits behind it, but also they can still be a little bit further from the road, which I'll explain a little bit later. But really the purpose of this is to bring facades closer. So we'd have, instead of a building that has 100 feet behind it or 50 feet behind it with a bunch of parking, you'd have it closer than parking potentially in the rear. So hidden parking essentially. So US 1 corridor. So in the US 1 corridor, it's the C2 zoning district and mixed use, which currently the mixed use zoning district has a residential setback of 10 feet and 0 feet. So actually the mixed use already accommodates being closer to the road if necessary. And C2, as mentioned before, it's 25 feet, so they can be as far back as 25 feet as the maximum, or the minimum setback, sorry. Now we're saying that they have to be 20 feet, and this is also a topic of discussion at some point. We might change this, we're not sure yet. At one of the council workshops, they mentioned that they would want one side of the road of US 1 to be potentially closer, and the other side to remain as is. That's a topic of discussion. I'm not sure how you guys feel about that, but we'll change that possibly depending on the feedback of this board as well as council. You seem confused, Liz.
I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Because the only way you could change that is if the business or like the shopping plaza goes under like major construction and
yeah.
And then, but you can't do it to existing.
So the purpose of this master plan when it came through was not only to think of today, but to think of 10, 20, and 30 years from now. So let's say hypothetically, I don't know, Marshall's Home Goods, that whole plaza gets knocked down for whatever reason. Then how would the village vision that plaza to be? So would you want it to be closer to the road? Would you want it to remain as it is? That's kind of the purpose of this. So
okay.
Really, how close do you want to the road? Do you want parking in the rear? Do you want particular aesthetics? Like all of these things are things to kind of ponder when you're going through this process.
Okay.
So, for example, US 1, as it is right now in the code, drive-throughs are limited to the US 1 corridor. So we left that the way that it is. So nowhere else in the village will you be allowed to have drive-throughs. As mentioned, it says that it's limited to gas stations and mixed use in the C2 zoning districts along US 1. Commonly, gas stations are use these drive-throughs as well as fast food. However, they're fronting the road. So what we were proposing, if you see at the bottom, is we're proposing that those drive-throughs essentially are on the side or the rear of the building rather than being to the front, and that they be screened from the public with some type of landscape or vegetation.
That makes sense.
We've been working. And then drive-throughs would be prohibited in the front of the building except for fuel stations, which still in that case we'd like them to be screened. So within the US 1 corridor, what would the purpose and intent be is to encourage and provide an enhanced physical appearance, increased landscaping, clustering complementary uses, and construction of pedestrian-oriented facilities. So formula restaurants, for example, as I mentioned, formula restaurants would be more like your Starbucks or McDonald's or Burger King, things like that, or even you could think of an Olive Garden or TGI Fridays or something like that. Those are formula restaurants rather than like a Gallery Grill or something like that, where they're like national chains in a sense. So those restaurants would be permitted up to the square footage. As mentioned, we're still tweaking that potentially, of 1,250 square feet, similar to formula businesses. We still would encourage that the parking would be to the rear, except for those that are essentially west of US 1. Facades would be closer to the corridor, as well as we'd have civic open space landscaping and tree canopies, which I'm going to go over some of these other things that aren't on here yet.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
A formula business or restaurant under 1,250 square feet, it's really hard to imagine. So the intent is really that there are no formula businesses.
There are Subway.
We're still doing some due diligence on that. We're
Yeah.
we're looking to see what kind of makes sense. At one of the council meetings, it was brought up by one of the council members that they'd like to see some type of square footage implemented, and it was brought up of 1,250. But we're still tweaking it based on this past council meeting in January. They mentioned that they'd like us to do a little bit more due diligence. So that's why I keep saying it might change.
Oh, that's right. I'm just thinking like Walgreens and
Yeah.
CVS, right? What are those? 3,000 square feet? Like, okay, thank you.
But to your point, though, it wouldn't what we're doing is not outright prohibiting them. They just have to be
Yeah.
used by exception, right?
Special
So
exception, got it.
So it's just another layer essentially. So we're not saying you can't do it,
Yeah.
but it just requires them to come to council and say, hey, I want to do I don't know, a Starbucks. Can you please, approve my application based on the information I'm providing to you?
Got it.
So, and then they would still go through the site plan process and.
Just for scale, kind of go to, what's the size of the Starbucks? Like 1,250 doesn't really mean anything. Maybe it means to you guys.
It's more than 12.
Oh, yeah.
I can't recall, but it's a lot more than 1250.
It is a lot more than
Yeah.
1250.
How big is this room?
Well,
Is this room
how big is your house,
close to 1,250? Like,
Yeah, I think
we're
so.
going to do some research on the size. The 1,250 number came from a council member, but we still need to fact check it a little bit more.
Is that-
why did not trying to take us off? I just was immediately was like,
it's just that,
1,250 is
you
small.
know,
Yeah.
for a restaurant, I mean, really? I mean,
well, Publix is what, 30,000?
oh
Yeah.
my God.
But like I heard, Subway is one of those that is national
Yeah.
and is tiny. I mean, probably that's square footage, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
have one, which I didn't even know we did.
Yeah,
I just
in
found
the
out.
Catalan Plaza. Yeah.
We do.
Because it's so small.
Where is it? I still,
Catalan Plaza, there's a subway over there.
Yeah, it's
Okay, go ahead, Lance.
Yeah,
I
so.
just get Publix.
The frontage standards for this would be, obviously since the US 1 corridor, it's only US 1 would be the primary street, as well as Tequesta Drive, because there is that portion that kind of intersects US 1. But the frontage standards for this, like porches, for example, wouldn't be allowed on US 1, but maybe a bracketed balcony or something to that extent might be, depending on how the development's put together, it could be potentially on that road. Some of this is this is the part that I want to get to. So formula restaurants. So we put a definition in the code, and essentially what the formula restaurant would be is that a restaurant that would be a chain or a group of 3 or more restaurants in the nation, and then they have this particular description. So it'd be same or similar name, trademark of others in a chain or group, standardized or limited menu with ingredients, food, beverage, and preparation. It offers characteristics and style that are distinctive and standardized among the chain, such as exterior design, architecture, interior design, or uniform. So essentially that business, if you go somewhere else in the nation, is going to look the same. That's what it is. And that would be limited to US 1. Frontage standards I just went over. And then we get into the last overlay, which is the Village Center. So Village Center, and I'll let you look at this map one more time. Village Center is on the east portion of the railroad, which then it stems from Bridge Road, goes up past the old Paradise Park, and then goes up Old Dixie all the way to Village, and still kind of goes up even to the water plant. So what's allowed there currently is C2, C3, and mixed use. The frontage standards I've already gone over, so I'm gonna actually just for sake of time go through that. So what's the intent? To encourage the architectural character and diversity of uses such as residential, commercial, civic spaces, while providing pedestrian-friendly environment, connection between Tequesta Drive, Bridge Road, and Old Dixie. So in this zoning district, it's kind of similar to the Tequesta Drive overlay, where formula restaurants would be prohibited, formula businesses up to 1250 would be allowed, parking in the rear would be encouraged, as well as facades closer to the road and civic open spaces. Frontage standards for this would be essentially Tequesta Drive would be a primary street, Bridge Road, Old Dixie, Main Street, as well as Village Boulevard, and then these would be the allowable frontage standards that are there for each one of those roads.
I have a question.
Yes.
Thinking, you know me,
Mhm.
going to the future.
Yep.
And on Bridge Road, you're saying that the building could not have a porch, okay? Now, we don't know what's going to come in, and the design of the building, thinking ahead, like that's what we're supposed to do, not only today, but to look for 25 to 30 years ahead of time.
Yeah.
Buildings change, and like, you know, porches and then little patios and stuff. I mean, that might be something that would be enhanced on Bridge Road, because some of those buildings are so old that somebody could come in and just change the whole thing and have something that would be,
And you
I
make
wouldn't want wood.
Yeah, you make a good point. Typically speaking, porches are really associated with like a single family home in a sense.
Yeah, but I mean, you might have to change, you know, but I wouldn't want it like on Tequesta. But Bridge Road is unique. It's a small, the business is there, and they're gonna change.
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna come in. We already know that. A developer's gonna come in and just
Yeah.
boo-hoo the whole thing.
Yeah.
So that's something that you really kind of like need to look at.
You brought up a great point, and we can also touch on it with the waiver process. So we created a waiver process where people can, because you can't design a code to fit every potential
No, you
development, right?
can't.
But there's a waiver process where this is this is the set code, but you can request relief from it, but you have to prove that there's some public benefit to it, which is, is it a better design? So it gives PZB and the village council a little bit more leverage to, if they want that relief, then they have to provide some sort of better design or public benefit. So we'll get into that later, but there is a way past it.
I know, I'm sorry, because
You're fine. Ask the question. because it's good to-
Lance and I have had many arguments.
Not arguments. Yeah.
You shouldn't say arguments, discussions.
It's a debate.
Yes. But I mean, but Bridge Road is unique
It is.
versus like Main Street and Old Dixie High. I mean, it's
Yeah,
unique.
I agree.
So,
And we can, so this was originally tailored off of the report that Treasure Coast put together, and that was through the charrette process and getting everybody's feedback. So certain things, as you mentioned, if it makes sense or we can include it in the waiver, then we'll do that. Which I will touch on the waiver I think, in a few slides.
Okay.
So
There
these
we
are the
go.
types
There
of
we go.
frontage standards. So you have shop fronts, you have stoops, you have porches, you have forecourts, bracketed balconies, and then you have an arcade.
Oh, they could do one of those little balconies just as an artistic thing, if there's this structure.
Which I think-
And we're saying no, that they couldn't do.
The balcony is allowed though.
It's
Oh,
allowed.
yeah,
except for
okay,
Main
but I was
And-
looking at the porch.
And what's labeled as a stoop is also what a lot of people would consider a porch, right? It's what you'd see like a brownstone in New
Yeah,
York or
well,
Boston.
I grew up in New York, we had stoops.
Yeah.
I had to wash it every Saturday.
Yeah, we did.
I know it's stoops. Okay.
So just what type of landscaping we'd like. I'm sure you guys remember this was give or take, I believe the beginning, if not the end of 2022, if not the beginning of last year. We actually did a code update which included landscape changes. So we beefed up the landscaping, which required the landscape buffers to go from 10 feet in certain areas to 15 feet, and from 5 feet to 10 feet. So we're trying to kind of encourage more landscaping. Also to have some type of street trees to separate the public from vehicular lanes, and have some type of canopies just for shading. And I know that a lot of people keep talking about Old Dixie, so that's kind of what we were thinking at some point. Maybe Old Dixie gets beautified at some point, and they'd have canopy trees and things like
They're
that.
really bad. It's desperately needed.
But that's the intent. The whole corporate purpose of this is, as I mentioned, the years to come, 20, 10, 15, however many years that comes up. And then civic open space. So I mentioned a few times about civic open space. So essentially what civic open space would be is you have a property, and that property would then designate a area, which I'll show on here, designate an area that'd be for the public, in a sense. So the way that we would do this is that if you have a new development or a redevelopment that is equal to 20% or more of the existing building square footage, then they'd have to provide 5% of their lot to have a civic open space or civic benefit. So that can be, and I'll go over the different ones that are there, but for example, that can be a water feature, or it can be a bunch of benches. There's a bunch of different avenues that you can use. Actually, it's right here. So like green, for example, is one of them. Plazas, playgrounds. So like, for example, if you happen to have, I don't know, Village Center for whatever reason, or Village Square decides that they want to include some type of civic open space where they want a playground for whatever reason, they can put it there. A square or attached green, forecourts, and public passageway. So we included forecourts and public passageways just because if you do happen to have a development that can't really accommodate some of these bigger civic open spaces, they should still provide something. And it can be a small square footage of 250 or less. So just as a reference, so as I mentioned, Village Square, and then you have the parcel that's right here off of Tequesta Drive. The one off Tequesta Drive is approximately a quarter of an acre, give or take, which is about 11,000 square feet. If they had to go through the process of a new development, then they'd be required to have about 578 square feet of civic open space, which would fit under that forecourt area if they could. And then you have Village Center, which is a shopping center, and they have 5.5 acres of land, which they would be required to have about 12,000 square feet of civic open space. So that'd be an area that would be designated to whether it be a water feature or a playground or something.
Instead of concrete.
Yes. And then parking in the rear, I know I talked a few times about rear parking. These are just examples of rear parking. So instead of you having parking in the front where the building's pushed all the way to the side or in the back, you then would have it more closer to the road and the parking would be behind it. Just to kind of get that aesthetic closer to the road. And then these are just examples of different rear parking options that you can do. So for example, if a building is fronting two primary streets, then you have the one on the left. If it's fronting primary street and a secondary street, you'd have the one in the middle. And then if it's fronting a primary street, secondary street, and an alley, then you'd have the one on the right. And I know this is a lot to absorb, but that's why we're doing this today, so you can ask and kind of get familiar with it. So when the ordinance comes in, you have a little bit more, I guess, knowledge on what's going on. Go ahead, Liz, I know you have a question.
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
Aren't you happy?
So we also included this into the ordinance, which will be kind of building facade, such facade transparency. So essentially what it is we're trying to eliminate these blank walls. So you might see an application come before you in P&Z and it's, you know, it has windows on all sides except one, for example. So we're trying to eliminate that, so they have to have some type of facade treatment there, whether it be a window, a door, something that would just provide some type of aesthetic interest to the to that wall. And then we get into waivers, which Jay mentioned or alluded to earlier. So essentially, what's a waiver? So an applicant or a property owner may seek a waiver if they're unable to meet the site or landscape requirements, and the waiver can be essentially requested with certain regulations. So the waiver has to be granted by the village council, and it has to be in conjunction with the site plan review. And what can they not request? So they can't add uses. So if, for example, if a formula business is, a formula restaurant is prohibited, they can't say, well, I kind of want to do a formula business in this area, a formula restaurant in this area, so can I request a waiver? If it's not allowed, it's not allowed. Then we get into the portion that we talk about allowable densities or height. We're not increasing that either. You're not allowed to increase your density or your, not height, your density or intensity. So essentially if the code says that it's only allowed to have 18 units per acre for whatever it is, or it's it, nothing more. And then building height. So if the code says you can only go up to 4 stories, it's 4 stories, or whatever the height would be. You can only do that.
Still can't change it, huh?
No.
Can't make it less.
No. And then there is required criteria for this, similar to a variance, which I'm going to talk about right now. So what are the differences between the two? So you guys are familiar with variances. You get them for single family, you get them for docks, for example, or fences or different things like that. Variances on the left-hand side is a relief from the code. So they're usually associated with land hardship. So for example, everyone's lot for the most part is a square or a rectangle, but for whatever reason this particular property is a circle. Then usually that's like a land hardship because they can't meet the same regulations that you might have. Typically they're granted based off hardship, physical characteristics of the property, and strict application of the zoning code will result in the hardship of the landowner. And that is approved by elected officials, which is either this board or the council. Now waivers are similar, where they are released from the code, but they are typically used with PUDs. And when I say that, PUDs are planned use unit development. So let's say, for example, you happen to have, I don't know, like the reserve that came in a number of years ago. And they can't meet particular requirements, but they can provide, you know, a tot lot and things like that that would be a benefit. Then in some cases, a lot of municipalities will grant certain waivers to them because they're providing a public benefit. So that's what Jay was mentioning earlier, where if, for example, a porch isn't allowed, maybe we could include that or encompass it into the code and say, all right, if you're putting a porch, how are you meeting those public benefits? Are you, you know, providing better aesthetics, or are you giving some type of pedestrian-oriented connection between one development to another? Who knows? And as I mentioned, you cannot request variances for those criteria that are there, and in this particular case, the waivers would be approved by the village council. So this is what would happen if we happen to, when the time comes that you get this ordinance, it would come before this board as the local planning agency, and then eventually it would go to council for the first reading, second reading, and then potentially adoption. And I know there's going to be questions, so this slide will stay up here. And that's it. I know it's a lot. Ask away. That's what we're here.
I've already asked my questions.
Don't jump up all at one time.
When you give it to us, then we can.
Yeah, and that's why I know it's a lot right now, but when you get the actual ordinance and you can kind of, you know, dig your teeth into it a little bit more, then I'm sure a lot more questions will come through. But I know it's a lot to throw at you at once.
I guess just one quick, so the public space requirement, it is only gonna be a physical space requirement, not an investment threshold that's required like some other communities have?
So we mentioned, so it's not on here, but we also thought about the idea of, let's say for example, a person can't provide that civic open space, then they could potentially do a payment in lieu. So a lot of municipalities would do that for whether it be this or art in public places or things like that, where you can essentially invest into like I guess a bank in a sense, and then the village or city or whoever it is can use those funds to acquire property or beautify parks or something to that extent. So that's not on here. I didn't want to kind of throw that in here.
I just know it comes up a lot when we deal
Yeah.
with businesses in other jurisdictions, so I was curious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was an option that we did talk about, was kind of like a payment in lieu. So.
And you basically, you've made it harder to get tightened it up for the variances. We don't like variances.
Yeah, so we made it so variances would be strictly variances and waivers or waivers. So it kind of gives a little bit more wiggle room to the council in a sense. Instead of them granting variances that run with the land, this would be something that would run with the development. So hypothetically speaking, they build something tomorrow and then a new owner comes in and says, I hate this building, I'm gonna put something else up, that waiver would then essentially go away. It wouldn't be with the land
Right.
in that case.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and we
It
don't
wouldn't.
do commercial variances
No.
here anyway, so
Yeah.
I'll go through the council.
Yeah.
Teresa?
Thank you.
Liz, Sherry, Jean, no questions? Okay. No.
I hope it made sense.
Thank you,
This
Lance.
is good to know.
Thank you.
Anyone?
Do you want to
No?
I just have a quick question.
Yes.
open up to comments?
So let's say Tequesta Shops where TJ Maxx
Well, we're not
is.
voting on anything.
So if that got bulldozed and redeveloped, you're saying like something like TJ Maxx wouldn't be able to go back in?
No. So they could go back in, and honestly, just to be completely honest with you, so that already is, for the most part, if it were in any other area in the village, it'd be a special exception use because it exceeds the square footage that's allowed.
Right.
In this particular case, it would still be a special exception use, meaning that it's allowed, but it just has to go before council for the use itself. So meaning council would approve the use, and then they would come back to this board for the actual recommendation of the site plan, and then it'd go back to council.
So it's just another hoop.
It's just another hoop. So like, for example, we had the vet last year.
Yeah.
The vet went to council first.
Yeah, I went.
Right.
Yeah,
same
and
kind
got
of-
approved,
same
and then
kind
they
of-
came before this board, and then they went to council again.
If I tell my wife, I heard TJ Maxx is gonna be able to come back, she.
No,
Yeah.
this is still.
Home goods.
Home goods.
Home goods, yes.
Thank you.
I'd like a Panera bread.
It better be under 1,200.
Jared?
Does the new ordinance, is it
Who's
contemplating
this?
like reducing,
Who's
parking
the
spaces? I'm Jared, by the way.
Oh, this is Jared, everyone.
Who?
Jared.
This is our new alternate.
Oh, he's new, okay. He's
Yes,
an
so-
alternate, okay.
So the new ordinance does not contemplate it. It's already in the code that actually was added in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And that was more so, we don't want to, I guess, keep including these large parking lots if we don't have to. So you can still have alternative parking. So for example, you can do shared parking or
You do
parking
parking
accumulation
study.
study. And that would be conducted with a traffic engineer and then provided to the village. So that's already an avenue that a developer or whoever can use or take advantage of.
Okay, any more questions?
No,
Okay.
We will when we get it.
We'll try to send it to you a little bit early. As soon as the ordinance gets drafted, we'll try and send it ahead of the agenda going out, so you have some more time to chew on it.
Okay,
It's a homework assignment, Jay.
That's right.
thank you, Lance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and any other board comments? And
Public
Jared, did you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Jared. I'm an alternate, the third, I believe. So I'm an attorney up in Hope Sound, and I do a fair amount of real estate transactional work. I also do a little bit of land use work within the town of Jupiter Island and also in South Morgan County, although I don't, to be honest, know Tequesta's code that well.
Oh, you gotta talk a little bit louder,
Sorry,
please.
I don't know Tequesta's code really at all, so I'm
Okay.
just here to see what you guys have
Well,
and hopefully have fun and sit on the other side of the dais.
We learn about the code as it comes before us,
Yeah.
so
Right.
that's,
Yeah, and that's why I just wanted to kind of sit and listen, so, thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Good to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
okay,
No further staff comment?
okay. Then, Motion
Now,
to
can I move to
adjourn?
adjourn?
Yes. Motion to adjourn, please.
I think we should stay. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, we're adjourned.